Oh, t-shirts for sale. Oh yeah, and t-shirts are for sale now if you want to buy some. And also we have girls' shirts. We just got those in, so yeah, they're all going for sale right now. So you better pick them up quick before we run out of them again. What's that? Oh yes, there's. It's mono, but he's finishing setting up right now, so.
All right. I built this novel little. I guess I'll start off. I'm ASM, and I'm going to talk about Wallphone. And I built this cool little presentation system that I dropped on the way over here. Ultimate failure, but maybe during the talk I'll rebuild it. It's kind of cool. You take the inside of a wireless ball mouse, you turn it inside out, and you get a two-dimensional gyroscope. And then you can like hold it in your hand and rotate things around like that. Can't hear you. Sorry, you just hold it in your hand, you can rotate it around, and it'll rotate the box I put on the screen right here. These are going to be my slides. But so the idea was I just rotate it in my hand, and you get. Anyway, right. Okay, so the title of the talk is Wallphone, Exploiting Trust in Social Networks. And I'm just going to give a quick overview. First on VoIP. I know you've heard a lot about it today. Then I'll talk a little about social trust networks, old subject. And then I'll talk about Wallphone. Okay, so VoIP. You take telephones, you can combine them with the internet. Voice over internet. The internet is, as we've learned this weekend, is kind of bad sometimes. And then when you combine bad plus legacy systems, you get really bad. So that's bad. That's all I'm going to say about VoIP. Social trust networks. So we all know that they're composed of individuals, right? As each individual talks to one another, they rely on some sort of identification. And usually this identification is trusted, hopefully. You can write things that will graph out how these people are connected together, and they tend to look really nice. And apparently, building social networks is profitable, like MySpace or LiveJournal or whatever you want to call them. So these are fun to play with. So now I'll talk about Wallphone. It's really simple, and it's actually really embarrassingly simple. And I'm almost embarrassed to be up here talking about it. It's a pretty old thing. All it does is it spoofs caller ID. Really simple. And this has been known for a while that you can hook in and you can spoof caller ID, and it's really easy. But when you spoof caller ID, you can do a couple things. So number one, you can spoof caller ID. Number two, if you call a number with its own phone number, it'll drop you to their voicemail if it's Singular or T-Mobile. This has also been known for a while. I'm not the first person. Or, for example, you could do a man-in-the-middle attack where you cause two people to call each other from each other's phone numbers, and then you just listen in. Pretty easy. All right? So these are the three features of Wallphone. Right. Okay. So now I can sit around with these features and I can play around with them and I can mess all my friends up. It's a lot of fun. But after a while it gets old and I sort of want to do something else with this. And so that's where the Wallphone card comes in. It's just a simple business card. I have one here. There's also one here. Not there. All right, so that's what it looks like. And the idea is I go out to bars, preferably where there are lots of women, and I give them this, and they go, oh, tee-hee-hee. And I say, hey, how devious are you? And they go, oh, well, I'm not very devious. And I go, okay, never mind, and I walk away. But if they say they're really devious or they get all interested or whatever, I say, okay, let's take a quick quiz. Would you call somebody with somebody else's number? If they say no, you move on. If they say yes, let's go a little bit further. Would you check somebody's voicemail anonymously? They say, oh, well, maybe I'll do that. I don't know. We'll see. And you say, oh, well, would you have two of your friends call each other from each other's phone numbers, and then you listen in without them knowing. And if they say yes to all those questions, I give them the card. And I'll usually give them my email address, and I'll say, hey, if you find something interesting, send it back to me, but enjoy, have fun. And then they run off, and they do whatever they want to do. Where am I? Let's see. Okay. So one interesting thing about this is I have all the logs of all the phone calls, number logs. And so what I can do is I construct, I just track the calls and I construct what people are doing with the system. So for example, there's actually 2 maps here, and I've hash encoded the numbers so you guys can't steal phone numbers. But these are all unique people. And you can see one person is the target of one person who does them all the time. And then another person who does them sometimes, and another person who does them occasionally. But you map these social networks just by people calling each other's voicemail, or playing with their friends, or doing whatever. So I have some more maps here that we can look at. Here's another one. It's kind of intricate. Some of them get really large. I'm still working on the logging to even get it more intricate based on timing and stuff, but they're kind of cool. You can also see different personalities. Oops. So here's a pretty good work. It's kind of cool. And there's some people who are totally self-centered, and they just look like this. And so there are actually a lot of these. But one thing you can track is you can track how people pass on the number sometimes. If it's closely related in time, you can say, oh, well, I get these 2 phone calls because they checked the same phone number and they were in sort of the same period of time. They're probably related to each other. And so I can connect them on my social network. So that's mapping social networks through this weird lol phone thing that somebody came up with. I think that's all the networks I have. Yeah. So now I'm just going to take a little turn for a minute, because after this part of my presentation, I just have a lot of sound to play. And I figured that, while I have sound playing, maybe something should be listening to it. And so why not have a gigantic cortical simulation listening to it that you guys can look at and then fly around in? Why not, right?
Pass out the drugs.
Okay, that's the end of that part. So let's see here. I hope this works. Oh, I should give you a talk. Oops. All right, let's go over. Oh, that's empty. A crash course in neuroscience. An overview. So what influences neural architecture? How do we model this? What goes on? As you know, there are lots of things in the brain, and so how do we run these on computers? Do we run them in parallel? Do we run them in a single system, serial, in real time? How do we do that? And then once we figure all that out, how do we actually do it on the architectures? Okay, so this is your brain. And even at this level, there are these sort of architectural divisions. For example, in the occipital lobe, there's the occipital region, which is responsible for vision, for example. And this region talks to maybe the somatosensory region, like that. But I'm interested in the auditory cortex because I want to play some sound. And so I'll just model the auditory cortex. It's really easy to model because it's tonotopically mapped, which means that one end of the cortex, or that section of the cortex, you have neurons that are responsive to 20 hertz. And at the other end, 20 kilohertz. So you might recognize this as a Fourier transform. Your ear actually performs a Fourier transform on sound and tonotopically across your cortex. So this is really easy to do because all you do is you take a piece of cortex, you model it, and then you slap a Fourier transform over it, and then you just play some sound. It's pretty easy. All right. Within this structure, neurons are arranged in layers. And so one of the most important layers is layer 4, which is a highly interconnected layer. Using your phone in this talk is a really bad idea. Anyway, so layer 4 is a special layer. It's highly interconnected. It's sort of like the transport layer of the cortex. So that's a cool one, and we'll go into that later. But even within the layers, well, of course, they're neurons. And neurons are divided into dendrites at the top and axons at the bottom. Dendrites are the input, axons are the output. And if you put in a small input to the dendrites, you get a small output out. Pretty simple. And if you put in maybe 2 inputs, you get a bigger input, or an output, sorry. And that's actually a spike. Okay? And if you put in a lot of inputs, you get a lot of input out, or output out. So it's kind of an additive thing. Okay. Now how do we model this? Because neurons are incredibly computationally intensive little devices. There are lots of different differential equations that you have to, if you want to do each of these. So typically people will put maybe a neuron per CPU. And if you want to do 3 billion neurons, you're out of luck. Or you could put a bunch of neurons on one CPU. That would be ideal, but how do we do this? Okay. So the core of this network is actually a queuing mechanism. Everything is an event, and you just throw events on the queue. Okay? So say, for example, then I can take a bunch of neurons and put them all in the same queue. Right? To do this, you have to model what the neurons are going to do faster than they would do it in real time. So that means you have to be faster than real time. You actually have to predict the future. So this is time-traveling neural simulation right here. All right, so the way this works is I have a standard model of a neuron, and I know what's going on at t0, and I can say, okay, it takes me this long to calculate the entire model of the neuron. So it takes me, say, 15 nanoseconds or whatever to calculate the next 100 milliseconds of a neuron. Well, I know exactly what will happen, and I'll throw everything on the queue in the future, and then I'll go back to whatever I was doing. So 15 milliseconds later, this neuron will fire and trigger another one, and I can keep doing this, but I can do this for thousands of neurons in real time, which is cool. No one actually does this in real time. They usually spend days running these simulations. So there's a lot of math. And the important thing is that there's a couple constants that you can alter in the equation that drives this entire model, and they'll alter the behavior. So depending on which constants you use, you get different types of neurons. So it's a really elegant system. And there are no differential equations, so you don't have to solve any differentials. Okay. The architecture is really complicated. I'll skip this. But the point is that you can run multiple architectures on one CPU. I'm actually going to run 4 on my laptop, pipe the sound through it, and display it back over here on that laptop. And so what I do is I take 4 chunks of Cortex, interlink them, so you can run 4 chunks of Cortex on 4 different computers, or 100 different chunks of Cortex on 100 different computers, and then run them on multiple computers. Okay? And the final step in the entire operation and the goal of the whole thing is I wrote this software while I was working at a lab at NYU, and we're actually dealing with real neurons. And the question is, okay, how do we link real neurons to A, other real neurons in Japan, and B, how do we link them to simulated tissue? Well, it's easy. You just create an API, sort of like a neural API, and you can link neurons to simulated tissue or neurons to other neurons, and you base the whole thing on UDP and TCP so you can do it over the internet.